I was not that big into the Persona series until a couple months ago. A friend referred me to the series seeing as the new title Persona Q was being released in a few months at that point. So I purchased and completed Persona 3 and 4 to get some background knowledge of the series before diving into Persona Q. I thought those games were decent, so when I eventually got Persona Q, I was a little excited. That being said, just how is Persona Q, and does it live up to its predecessors? Well, let me take you into the labyrinth that is Persona Q. See what I did there? So our story is actually quite fascinating. In the beginning, you choose to either be the protagonist from Persona 3 or 4 with each of their respective gangs. For my playthrough, I chose the Persona 4 protagonist and gang, but the only ways this choice is different from choosing the Persona 3 gang are obviously the character interactions and some story aspects. Essentially, what happens in the Persona 4 storyline is the group meets a woman named Margaret who takes them to a fortune-telling booth, and when the group emerges from it, they are in a strange place that is kind of like Limbo called Yasogimi High. Oh, and let's not forget the constant ringing of a mysterious clock tower that symbolizes death that appears when the group enters the high school. And the Persona 3 gang gets here as well, but in a slightly different manner. The game wastes no time at all ushering you into your first labyrinth, which is something I will get into later. And this is where the game really starts to change pace, for the better. The beginning was kind of slow, but I guess it was necessary to introduce the cast of characters for people just starting with Persona Q. As someone with experience with both of the previous games, the introduction seems sluggish, but this did not bother me too much. This complaint is a mere nitpick I felt I should point out for people who have played Persona 3 and 4. And while I'm at it, I should note that the game is text heavy and story heavy. Although the great thing is that the entire story has voiceovers which make the story feel more important and less of a monotony. If you prefer a more action-packed game, then Persona Q may not be right for you. I know some people who have tried the game, but they were repelled by its focus on story. The game has some pacing issues, but other than that, the story is great. The lines are well written and character development is adamant throughout the whole plot. Every character is dynamic and each has their own distinctive persona. Get it? Not to mention the voice work is very well done, and there is hardly ever a dull moment in the story. The character arcs of the new characters you meet in your first labyrinth, Rei and Zen, are phenomenal. The ending is so sad yet satisfying that it may just be one of the most touching endings I have ever experienced this year. Get it? Because 2015 just started? And now it's about time to start the part of the review I feel most uncomfortable about explaining, the gameplay. When you evaluate the gameplay of Persona Q on its most basic level, it is an RPG dungeon crawler. But oh boy, is there a lot more to it. If you haven't played a Persona game, here's the basic rundown. It is a turn-based combat game where you use many party members to attack a foe, and is quite addicting and fun. Enemies called shadows appear at random as you navigate the game's labyrinths, which are essentially dungeons. One thing that you may have to get used to in this game is the perspective of movement, which as you can see now on screen is a bit odd. Additionally, it takes a bit to get used to the feel of exploring these dungeons as the controls are a bit weird. They just felt odd at first, and that's pretty much all I have to say about them. But as for all games, you get into the groove fairly quickly. As for the RPG element, it is a bit different from other Persona games. Unlike those previous titles, all party members can now use a sub-persona which increases HP and SP stats. This is actually a thing I wish was in previous titles because now all characters feel kind of equal, and it is yet another way this game lets you customize your fighting style. Another addition to the Persona series is the boost meter that is built up by exploiting enemy weaknesses. However, this addition is insignificant as the only benefit from having it is the slight chance of an all-out attack on an enemy. Other than that, the combat is your typical run-of-the-mill turn-based combat with flashy attacks. There is not too much you can mess up with turn-based combat, and Persona Q is no exception to that. All the enemies appear at random, so it never felt like I was grinding my way to the end of each labyrinth. If I wanted to explore and encountered an enemy whilst doing so, that was my fault, not the game's. And the boss fights actually have meaning to them, and each has their own distinctive persona. Whoops, there I go again. This is best embodied by the Queen of Hearts boss, whose character feels dark and her intentions feel actually evil. In that moment when you beat the final boss and all loose ends are tied up, you feel accomplished, which is something only a few games have ever managed to do for me. When I first picked up the game, it was impossible to put down. I would play it virtually everywhere I went. Something about exploring such a dungeon and fighting in Persona games is enticing to me. Perhaps it's the presentation. I mean, this game presents itself extremely extremely well. I have always loved Persona's art style, and on the 3DS, it is still great. The anime art style is a joy to look at in 3D, and the backgrounds and textures all look pretty great. Nothing stellar, but they are good nonetheless. As for character models and enemy design, a lot of it is recycled from previous titles with the same character models and a lot of the same enemies. This is not really a complaint, as thousands of other games do it, if not all sequels, but I was kind of hoping for more variety to the gameplay, as it's virtually the same as Persona 3 and 4's. I know that it's a weird complaint, as I called Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire a perfect game, but the problem here is that a lot of the dungeons feel a bit too similar to each other. Nevertheless, another aspect this game excels in is its music selection. The game has some pretty catchy tunes that are wonderfully written. Despite some initial control issues, Persona Q is a great experience from start to end. Although it's a story-heavy game, its story is compelling. The voice acting sort of does away with this flaw, and navigating my way through the labyrinths and battling enemies at random is addictive. Overall, I really enjoyed Persona Q, and from my experience, I can say that this is a great game for Persona fans. And on the flip side, this game requires you to have no knowledge of previous titles, so I would say that this one is perfect to start out with if you want to get into the Persona series. It gets you accustomed to the Persona style gameplay and story, while being portable, which is great for this type of RPG. I would highly recommend this game if you like RPGs or games with competent stories. If you have never played an RPG or just don't like RPGs, then this game might not be for you. After all, it is $50, which is a bit pricey for a 3DS game, but I assure you, it's worth the extra $10. If I had to give Persona Q a score, I would give it an 8.7 out of 10. I feel with the amount of content in the game, Persona Q is definitely worth buying and playing. And if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comments below. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to never miss one of my newer videos. And as always, thank you so much for watching and take care. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.